Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to give folks a few minutes to join and then we'll get started. Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to TBR's webinar series. Today, myself, along with other members of our tailored services team at TBR, will be discussing trends in capturing tailored data and insights for technology business leaders. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screens, you'll see a series of buttons. From left to right, you can access the slides, audio controls, Q&A, speaker bios, and our survey. After the webinar is complete, you'll receive an email with a replay link as well as a link to view and register for our other upcoming TBR webinars. If you have any questions as we go through, please submit them via the Q&A widget. We'll address as we go and or at the end. You can also reach out after the webinar's conclusion at webinars@tbri.com. Thanks again for joining and let's get started. So speaking today, you have a number of folks. My name is Bryan Belanger. I'm director of our tailored services team here at TBR. In my capacity, I lead a team of folks that work in a two-in-a-box model with our analyst teams across our 10+ TBR practice areas to design, execute, scope, and deliver tailored research engagements. So I've brought along a number of folks from our team today, including Katie Dubois, who's an analyst and engagement manager, Colin Naples, also analyst and engagement manager, Jeff Woolicott, principal analyst, and Angela Lambert, senior analyst and engagement manager. So before we dive into kind of the meat of the conversation and get the roundtable going, I just wanted to give you a sense at the highest level of who we are as a team, what we support, what we do, what our kind of day-to-day experience that we're drawing upon for the session is. So our tailored services team, as I mentioned, supports execution of custom research across our practice areas, working closely with our analyst teams, the ones that you consume content from on a day-to-day basis. We typically work across 5 areas in tailored services: competitive intelligence and benchmarking, customer intelligence, financial modeling, go-to-market enablement support, as well as opportunity and market forecasting analysis. We as a team support about 100 projects annually across these areas. Again, support the majority or all of our TBR practice areas, as well as the majority of our active client base. Our work scope includes one-time projects on supporting specific executive or practitioner initiatives, as well as programmatic studies providing customization and extension of insight beyond our core analysis base. Our approach, our methods, the tools in the tool chest of those you'll hear about from today include quantitative and qualitative research methods, secondary and primary research, financial modeling expertise, and a workload of 10,000+ interviews, partner surveys that we execute on a custom basis annually to support that project workload that I mentioned. So today, as we turn the corner into fall and are now 3/4 of the way through our year, is to kind of have a roundtable discussion around what we're seeing in tailored services and what we think it means both now and going forward for folks in decision making, support in decision making roles at technology companies. So there's 3 topics that we plan to cover today. The first is to kind of look back across the majority of the year at the major pervasive industry topics that we're being asked about to go explore, scope, pursue in tailored services, and what we think that means down the road for 2021 and beyond. We'll also discuss how projects are being shaped in the core areas that we work in around competitive intelligence, customer intelligence, and financial modeling to optimally structure projects to address the requirements of technology vendors' businesses, address the requirements of their leaders, and make actionable decisions on portfolio, pricing, go-to-market, customer targeting. Lastly, we'll talk about kind of a topic that's very much handcuffed to that, which is how research methodologies in our experience and from what we hear from our client base are evolving to support that mandate to execute those projects optimally and support business decisions. So in a minute, we'll dive through each of those in detail, and we'll draw on the experience of the folks on the call to share what they're seeing on the ground in the projects they're working on. Before we do that, I wanted to just provide the high-level top-down view of that first topic in terms of what areas are we being asked about most commonly. So I think everyone, I'm going to admit that this comes from our Salesforce data, and I know everyone probably has a reaction to that around Salesforce data cleansing, the administration of sales organizations and sales operations to effectively manage Salesforce data, but I think it's a good windsock of what we're seeing from a request perspective throughout the course of the year. So this is based on 500 formal requests that have been loaded into our TBR pipeline in terms of customer research and sorted by our practice area to give you a sense of where the requests are focusing on this year. So there's a whole lake of requests outside and beyond this, just from our analyst team's day-to-day interaction, answering questions around reports, the questions we get during readouts, both the folks on this team and our broader analyst base as well. But just to put a stake in the ground, went to our Salesforce system and looked at our pipeline, and this is what we see. So kind of 3 big buckets of work or of focus from an inquiry perspective around cloud, telecom and networking, and IT services and management consulting. So cloud, services, and telecom, there's a number of pervasive industry topics driving interest in these areas. The everything as a service mandate, the shift of workloads to cloud, of course, and then the pervasiveness of 5G from a marketing buzz and a market execution perspective, driving a lot of requests around these areas, both to preserve margin and opportunity in core businesses, as well as prepare for the new that we're seeing. And we'll go through a bunch of different examples of exactly what we're being asked about in those areas most commonly. But overall, at an overall level, that's where we're seeing the most interest throughout the course of this year thus far. To take that one level deeper, we went through those entries in our system and popped them into a word cloud to understand more specifically the subtopics, trying to quantify as best as we could those topics that our client base is asking us about most frequently from a custom research perspective. So of course, it maps to those major themes around cloud, services, and telecom, but you can start to see there's specific market areas and pain points that come to the fore that are one level deeper. So around cloud application platforms, telecom network deployment services, as OEMs in that space mobilize for the deployment of 5G networks and seek to modernize and build out RAN infrastructure to support those investments and those deployments. Third-party maintenance, core services, data center OEMs, trying to understand that ecosystem, private LTE networks, and eventually private 5G cellular networks for enterprise based on 5G. Consumption models evolving in the space. So typically what we see underneath those core areas is interest in areas that are close to the tip of the spear or close to the inflection point of requiring a portfolio structure, a go-to-market plan, and a monetization model and market entry pricing. I think of private LTE and some of the experiences we've had this year as CBRS auctions concluded in that area. Vendors started to evaluate not only business case and market opportunity in that space, but started to look more intently at how we package up those services, how we price them to the enterprise, and how we bring them to market, leveraging partnerships, leveraging the assets that we've invested in. Similar dynamics at play in areas like cloud application platforms, or even in core areas like network rollout and deployment services as well. And so one of the major areas that we wanted to do our first click in onto is the area of 5G. And 5G, as we say in the top of the slide here, 2020 in many years, in many ways, was the year of 5G from a tailored research perspective. I think there was a thread of preparation around 5G throughout the vast majority of requests that we saw this year. And as you saw a few slides ago, the telecom space was no stranger in terms of the inbound nature of requests that we saw this year. And there's a natural reason for that. So to quantify that, we pulled in some data from our 5G reporting, our 5G telecom market forecast. Of course, it's indicating that spend is ramping up even faster and peaking higher and earlier than we anticipated due to government support across multiple core markets. So as that ramps up, there's a whole series of network modernization investments, services investments, technology investments, and transformations that have to occur to define market opportunity, to tactically be ready for network deployments to support 5G from a pricing shaping perspective, and then monetization across the board in 5G, from ensuring competitiveness for core services, supporting deployments, core network functions as they transform to as-a-service paradigms in the space, but also looking out further in starting to establish business cases and monetization models to monetize new services for the enterprise that can be created via network slices in the 5G world as well. So to provide some additional thoughts based on some project experiences, I'll turn it over to Colin to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing in this space particularly.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. So as Bryan mentioned, we've had a lot of traction and a lot of activity around the 5G space in 2020. A lot of that aligns to these buckets, obviously. But in terms of market opportunity, what we're seeing and what's driving a need is basically vendors looking to understand, by region or even at the country level, what is the actual opportunity in terms of sale of products such as radios or RAN product, as well as the opportunity for the rollouts and attached services, those front-end deployment services. So that's driven a lot of the need and a lot of the urgency around that market opportunity piece. In addition to that, I think the rollouts and deployments have been more of a tactical piece, and that's really around folks trying to understand, what the differentiation is in terms of these services and how they're provisioned, and then different pieces of challenge around resourcing and those types of things as this space starts to grow.
Thanks, Colin. So another pervasive area that we've seen, I'll put it under the umbrella of disruption in the data center. And there's a number of different threads to that. I think it's not a surprising topic to folks, but it's been a primary theme of a lot of the research requests that we've seen this year. I think frequently TBR engages on a project to, there's kind of two big buckets. One is the business in distress or the business in transformation. And nowhere is that more evident from both a competitive, customer opportunity, adoption and demand side perspective than what's going on in the data center around both legacy players, disruptors, and services organizations and other firms that are supporting those initiatives as well. So there's three key themes that we want to talk about that we've seen as recurring focuses of requests in 2020 to date. So to do that, I'll turn that over to the team, starting again with Colin.
Yeah, great. So in terms of sort of the first piece around core revenue stream preservation, again, driving this research, there's been a lot of questions and a lot of activity around, a vendor will come to us and ask about how they line up or benchmark against different peers to ensure that how they're going to market, how they're selling is consistent, how their pricing is consistent. And sort of the complexity there is around multiple things, including whether you're selling direct, whether you're going through the channel and how that changes price points along each sort of step of that journey. And then ultimately looking to understand things like discounting, right? How does that happen? So it's fairly, I won't say easy, but there's a lot of public knowledge on the actual pricing of hardware product, which a lot of that comes into play in data center. But what's not understood is how those product prices drop from list to street, either through the channel or direct to end customers. So understanding that, making sure vendors are aligned to peers, using that knowledge to inform live deal and or bid scenarios is driving a lot of research need there, as well as sort of the attached support services that accompany the physical hardware being sold. So the standalone maintenance and support plans, what are folks buying? How are they buying it? For how many years? And again, what does the discounting look like on those attached services as you move from list to street pricing, whether via the channel or direct to end customers? Ange, did you want to provide the next insight?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. This is Angela. Hi, everybody. So then the second major trend that we'll call out on this slide that we've just gotten tons of inquiries about so far this year would be consumption models and everything as a service. I think if you look at the trend of these topics across the slides, what across this slide in particular, what you see is a lot of our inquiries here on the custom research side aren't even necessarily tied to a specific technology, but really more of a business model evolution. And that's certainly the case for consumption models in terms of pay-as-you-go type models, PC as a service, data center hardware as a service, as well as network. There's none of these have been a brand new trend this year. Most of these offerings have been around for a couple of years now. But I think the interest in research has really picked up as a consequence of customer awareness, I think, really starting to increase about these types of consumption models and becoming more widespread and just more general customer acknowledgement and adoption. So as that starts to happen, I think we see that the IT vendors are starting to take this concept more seriously. So at its core, this trend impacts the OEMs, the hardware makers who are present in the PC, data center, network spaces. They're impacted by ongoing margin and profitability pressures on hardware. There's certainly high competition in the devices space. The PC vendors are not only competing against each other, but emergence of competitors like AWS trying to come in with desktop as a service offering In the data center, obviously stiff competition between the hardware vendors in addition to aggressive competition from public cloud vendors as well. And we're seeing that a lot of these vendors are trying to utilize more as-a-service models to deliver more value to their customers, increase their stickiness within those businesses, and help their profitability. So this certainly is a trend that impacts the OEMs, but we also, from a business model perspective, see it impacts their broader partner ecosystem as well. Systems integrators, value-added resellers, also very interested in this topic as it really impacts the relationships between all of these players. It impacts their own business models, revenue cycles, and their customer engagement. So certainly interested in how this impacts partnerships between all of these types of companies and how that will lead to long-term revenue opportunities for all of them, as well as how they should adapt to some of these business models. So just lastly, in terms of the types of research we've been asked about and what people want to know, mostly they want to know, which OEMs are doing a good job, what their portfolios look like, how they are partnering and what type of strategies are being deployed in partnerships, especially as it pertains to new revenue and compensation models. And from the customer side, there's certainly a lot of interest in particular use cases, as this is still relatively new in customer adoption. What are the major value propositions for customers, and what does just the total market look like from a revenue opportunity perspective? So those are some of the kind of big questions that have come out of consumption models so far this year. And I think I'll pass it over to Jeff to comment on third-party maintenance ecosystems.
Okay, thanks, Angela. As you look at the element of the slide here, that top piece about the revenue stream preservation, the threats to that revenue stream preservation are really these two that we're talking about here. And the TPM, third-party maintenance growing opportunity, stems from several different things, one of which is the greater simplicity to preserve that revenue stream at the top has taken away some of the mystery, if you will, to that maintenance, and therefore third-party entities have more and more opportunity to go in and get it. So in the current mode, I've written something that's publishing today on this. There's a myriad of different factors, but it's looking like business model disaggregation. Profit pools are starting to erode, as we're learning from some of the other streams. Increased reliability, increased form factor miniaturization, the move that is somewhat of a threat to be forestalled by the as-a-service consumption models to preserve data center space is the move to the cloud, right? And in that movement, there is what some would just call the sticky legacy apps that are going to take time to move out. They could be dedicated to very old equipment, and the tech skills that were required to update it and modernize it aren't there. So they're just trying to hang on, wring out another year, 2 years of the application. So a service arm that can handle a hodgepodge, cats and dogs of equipment has an appeal in a short-term kind of stopgap way. Now, the other thing is, as a macro threat or a macro implication of single pane of glass management, the ability to do the button push, orchestrate and deploy, whether it's on-prem or anywhere else. These software tools mitigate the need for that smart hands labor to get in and fix a mission critical device in X number of hours. So the need for rapid response has been ameliorated through software. And that gives more opportunity for TPMs. Now, as this opportunity is increasing for those independent business models, it means OEMs have to decide, do we allow for the cannibalization of that revenue stream at the top to allow them to participate? Do we try to set up more sort of rules and regulations about firmware updates and software access and so on to try to fight them? So do you fight them, or do you create a business opportunity where it allows for multi-business participation to deliver that same end result? And there's no clear answer. It's a myriad of the intermediary business models within the IT supply chain. It impacts VARs, it impacts MSPs, it impacts distributors. A very interesting look is IBM carving out NewCo. It's really taking IBM and taking the next generation component as one and the legacy component as another, and setting it up as an independent business. They sold off the application managed services element to the India-centric vendors. Those India-centric vendors would love a third-party multi-vendor partner that could do the physical break fix while they can still do the remote delivery of all those software components. So there's multiple threads that result in the disaggregation of these traditional business models, and now the decision makers have to decide whether they are going to hold firm on the legacy and run it like an annuity business, perhaps with a lower margin expectation. I think for IBM, they needed it out because of the need to show, year-on-year growth, and it's tough to do if you have a large core of the business that may be declining at 5 to 10 points per year, albeit at healthy margins. So really, you can look at NewCo as factoring receivables and getting it out, so that they can just show the high margin growth areas without it being diluted by the ongoing operations here. So there's a set of choices, a set of business decisions. There's no one right answer. There's going to probably evolve a number of different approaches. But for now, what has been kind of a sleepy, quiet section at the lower end of the value chain that could be managed for a good margin is now starting to encroach in on those attach rates for warranty work, and it's setting up this disaggregation that will allow for sort of an ecosystem delivery to provide that physical repair of the infrastructure as it's needed. But consumerization's made it simpler, and therefore more different business models can get into it. I'll turn it back to Bryan.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So moving sort of to our second and third topics of this session, I think the one question is the what, which you heard examples of around what's occurring in the 5G ecosystem, what's changing in the data center, and what does that mean for projects to go and investigate commercial models, structures. But there's also kind of a simultaneous evolution in how research is being structured to effectively go and support those exercises, working within the conditions and the constraints of what's available out there for information today in the public domain. What skills and tools do organizations have internally, and then where can a firm such as TBR through custom research approaches, methodologies, and our lens on the market add value. So I think there's a few consistent themes that run through each and every one of our projects that we've done this year in terms of research structure and some of the evolutions that we're seeing there. And for that, I'll turn it back over to the team, beginning with Colin, to go through a few examples of those.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. So sort of as we've discussed and across the different research areas that we look at and serve, I'll focus on the top couple points here. Big themes that we've seen is, and this is not necessarily new, but certainly developing and sort of being pushed more to the forefront, which is a need to focus on both quantitative and qualitative insights as a blend. And that sort of leads on to the tactical piece below. But I think if we think about the blend of quantitative and qualitative insights, it's not enough to just say, well, here's the price point or here is the discount and that's it. There needs to be color, and what we're seeing is there needs to be color reported around why that's the discount, or in what scenario a price point drops from list to street in a certain way, such that clients can understand how to put that into their own, back to the tactical piece, their own framework, right? So how they inform actual decisions as they go into a competitive scenario, respond to an RFP in a competitive way, or lead with a bid in an actual deal in the field. So I think both of those things are sort of necessary and sort of the status quo at this point in time for most of the research we do, that quantitative and qualitative piece. In terms of focusing on tactical, there's a lot of sort of drive to bring research down from a 30,000 foot viewpoint level and down to earth, if you will. So this is the result, but what do we do about it is what we hear from clients a lot. So it's sort of the tactical mechanisms that are going to allow clients to either make a decision or respond to something based on what the research outputs are telling us. And so that applies to many different sort of areas of the research. It could be portfolio, could be pricing, could be financial performance, and it could be the go-to-market strategy. So within each of those areas, especially in these larger competitive intelligence projects, they may start out basically being focused on specifically pricing or specifically go-to-market. But then these other factors weave in to be able to tell the entire story. So that's a big trend that we're seeing is okay, you told us what the outputs are and we understand that, what should we do about it? So going beyond to offer recommendations based on research in a way that they can be deployed in a tactical fashion by clients. One last piece I wanted to add to this is in terms of another thing we see a lot around competitive intelligence, pricing in particular, but all projects and project flavors that run through TS and tailored services is going to be sort of the voice of the client saying, well, we can't get this information anywhere else. There are several reasons that drive that. I think primarily it's the fact that we're going to work with primary research, which allows us to deliver a product that is very much informed at a specific point in time and not stale. So the difference being no use of sort of a database or stale data that isn't tested in a live way. And sort of building off that is by doing live research, you can probe more deeply on, again, the tactical pieces, the what, the when, the why, and how it's happening. And so that differentiates us from a lot of other folks doing research out there. The last piece is, especially if we think about pricing, some of the portfolio stuff, and definitely the financial performance and pricing is around, well, okay, if you go out and collect pricing, right, how do we know that that's relevant to us, especially if we think about services businesses, of which there are services businesses obviously embedded in the data center work we do, in the telecom work we do, and then obviously in the IT professional services work we would do, which is we're sort of the big three buckets that Bryan talked about. And then, of course, across other technology sectors, there's a service component. And I think the challenge is, at least from our clients, is they want to gain an understanding, right, of where they sit, maybe in terms of price, maybe in terms of discounting level, And that could come in many different ways, such as by role on a total contract value perspective. It could be a blend of both. The point being, we always tend to get this question back around, well, that's great that you say you can do this. How do we know it's going to align with our worldview? How is it going to be relevant to us? And again, back to providing that qualitative and quantitative insight and building it around primary research that's live. It enables us to basically structure and tweak research and design it in a way to control for sort of an apples to apples compare, which ensures that the data we're giving back to a client is going to be highly relevant for them, and it's delivered in an agile way, which allows us to have checkpoints obviously throughout. So those are sort of big themes of why folks are coming to us that we've been seeing. Katie, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to dive a little deeper into these last two bullets here: phasing within studies and iterative delivery and review within engagements. I have been doing this for longer than I would like to admit, but there was a time where you would sign the statement of work, you'd conduct the research, and then you'd snail mail the final report on a floppy disk at the end of the 12 or 15-week project timeline. Now we do much more phasing within our studies, where we share multiple deliverables and project status updates throughout the timeline. It's become much more of a collaborative approach. I've seen a lot more pilot deliverables offered recently, and that's where after we complete, if we're conducting primary research, if we complete maybe 2 or 3 in-depth interviews or 15 or so surveys, we would share with the client what we have learned thus far, and it allows for us to make sure that either the discussion guide or survey is yielding the appropriate responses, and more importantly, it's aligned with the project objectives. Sometimes we find that certain questions just aren't yielding valuable or useful responses, so that way we can go back in and tweak the discussion guide or survey. So this is why pilot deliverables have become much more important. We also offer interim and final deliverables as well, where we hold final review sessions with the clients to talk about the initial insights and the final data that we have collected. So again, it's become much more of an iterative and collaborative approach working with our clients. We've also seen an increasing emphasis on the speed of insight, which has resulted in the compression of research timelines. So like I mentioned before, one project would take about a quarter, where now insights are provided almost in real time. So we've seen clients make strategic business decisions, sometimes in just 8 weeks rather than waiting a full quarter for the project to close. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jeff.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Katie. Katie mentions one of the hardest tasks she has in the business is keeping me on point as I'm conducting interviews on these various projects. And she's right about the iterative nature, and the reason why I say that is we will engage in very detailed discussions with the stakeholders at the beginning of the project to truly understand. One of the ways that I'll say it as we're doing this is at the end of the day, when we have finished, the decision you want to make is what and why, so that while I'm conducting those interviews, I am thinking as though I am them, and it's to lead the research on their behalf with very senior execs, CIOs of Fortune 500 companies, et cetera, to get at the business critical issues for those early adopters, because you can now make some informed decisions about what will be the early majority implications and what will have to be addressed in an enhanced offering or pricing or go-to-market approach to be able to go after the late majority on those things. And what can happen, as I was talking about the TPM space, there's so many different threads of disruptors within that whole ecosystem and environment for both the OEMs, the as-a-service piece, cloud erosion, small business models coming up. So you'll be on point doing those interviews, and you will hear an insight that sort of sparks a supernova event in the way you're thinking about another element of the business. So when we have those interim calls, it'll be to say, we've been going down the statement of work, and, here's everything that we were tasked with getting. Here are some pieces we found that we think are interesting. Do you want us to pursue these? Do you not want us to pursue these? And that's, to the point I said earlier, to keep me reined in, focused on what the client wants. But we need to bring those up. And that goes to the notion, the simplest way I can put it is, as we have studied how dev and ops is slowly coming together as DevOps because of the speed for continuous CI/CD, rapid iteration, continuous updates to software and as-a-service models, on down the line, how it's changing all sorts of things in IT development and IP and management, maintenance, monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. The same thing's hitting as far as strategy and tactics. They are coming together. You can't build a plan and then essentially sit on it for 6 months and take a look. A lot happens. It's the speed of change that's only accelerating and will only accelerate further as AI and automation provides informed decision making at a faster and faster rate. So that is what we try to build into the projects to make sure we stay on point, to make sure that there haven't been changes from the stakeholder side or an additional implication we hadn't thought of as we were shaping it with the stakeholder that is sparked from the pilot deliverable or some of the interim results. And with that, Bryan, do I turn it to you?
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. So quickly, wanted to kind of map some of those themes we're seeing against specific projects that we're most often engaged to address. So I think we've said throughout this presentation that we're typically focused on competitive and vendor analysis, financial modeling as it pertains to competitive or market opportunity, as well as customer analysis. Typically, I think a lot of the themes you've heard map into these areas from a competitive perspective. It's very much that theme, as Colin spoke to, of what can I find, what's not out there, what are those bots that are crawling the web not going to pull forward that we already have in our battle cards. So typically it's pricing, commercial strategy, commercial packaging, client experiential insights on all of those topics. Similarly with financial modeling, normalization against vendor taxonomies and breaking down beyond the reported P&L structure to better understand business level performance, country vertical performance. In customer, leveraging voice of customer to understand brand comparisons has been the need of the day. We've seen a movement away from kind of higher level customer market segmentation studies where you're speaking to an overall industry segment or an overall sector. It's much more in the vein of understanding vendor performance, leveraging customer research tools as a means of benchmarking quantitative performance in vehicles that can then be used to message the market, be it about reliability, attach rates, NPS, other metrics of customer success and satisfaction that are valuable in go-to-market activities. So just a few of the ways that we're seeing research methods and research structures evolve into these three buckets. Another trend here is we're seeing a merging of these buckets. So often it's not enough to just understand the customer in the context of a project, but a need to understand the customer segment or the brand experience of the competitors we're looking at as well. Our last topic, just to refresh, is how some of those changes that we've already started talking about are mapping into changes in the research tools that are in the tool shed. So for that, I'll turn it over to Angela to just share a few examples on that.
Sure, yeah, and to kind of keep it short here, in terms of what we see about changes in research methodologies, I think they are shifting towards anything that can provide deeper and more granular insight. We see there are an increasing number of tools and resources that can aggregate data from secondary sources. Individuals in general, they have an easier time educating themselves about specific topics and researching what is available online. So based on people having that ability to get smart on topics, folks generally don't want research that just reiterates what's publicly available. They're expecting those net new insights, and we've seen more and more that comes from deeper qualitative analysis, and increasingly a lot of interview work. We certainly have quantitative methods like surveys and financial modeling that check and validate some of what we learn qualitatively, but we hear people really trying to understand the story, whether it's the customer story, the partner story, or the story of other vendors, and they want to do that in a deep way that we can achieve through conducting interviews and briefings and having discussions with different industry stakeholders. The only other trend I would just mention there is that most of our research projects today, clients are looking for multiple confirmation points. And what I mean by that is, they don't just want to hear one angle. They want to hear, maybe what their systems integrator and VAR partners feel about a market, and they want to cross-check that across what customers are saying in the same area. So multiple points of confirmation in terms of industry players in the ecosystem, as well as the customer, to create really a full picture of what the drivers of a particular trend, business model, technology are.
Great. So as we conclude, I wanted to share one thought on a potential way forward that we're thinking about as a firm to address these dynamics. We've talked a lot about democratization of insight, compressed timeframes, need for real-time data, searchability in the Google world that we live in. And so we're thinking about that as a firm and evolving our paradigm and delivery of research to digital delivery. And I know this mirrors in many ways a lot of the systems that organizations like yours have in place today. But in terms of time to insight, longitudinal discovery of research across multiple years, often our clients are looking at the same topic periodically. So we're building out and thinking about a new digital platform for research delivery, so you can the old anecdote about the PowerPoint going on a shelf in someone's office and it getting lost there is truly a thing of the past. So that's just another trend that we hear echoed, is the need for that in really all of research delivery, and we're building out tools to do that. And we recommend that folks, as you think about how to create stickiness in research and create leverageability across multiple years for multiple use cases in an organization, that these types of vehicles will be emergent as the means to do so. So with that concludes the prepared portion of what we wanted to cover today. I know we've received a number of questions already from folks on the call, but we have the remaining 10 minutes. If there are other questions, please submit them via the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer those. And otherwise, as we leave that open for folks that may be typing in questions, please, as you exit the survey today, it'd be greatly appreciated if you could please fill out the survey that'll pop up as you exit the webinar. A replay of this and all of our other sessions are available. The replay for this particular session will be sent out via email. You can find other webinars that are upcoming and on demand at tbri.com. Next week on Wednesday, our cloud team is doing a session entitled How COVID-19 Did and Will Forever Change Cloud, based on what the cloud analyst team is looking at in terms of both our vendor coverage as well as customer survey and interview work that we've been speaking out through the session. So be sure to register and tune in for that as well. So again, thanks for the time today. Please do, we'll stay on. If there are questions, please do submit those to the Q&A. And otherwise, we appreciate the time and thanks for listening in and have a good rest of your day.